What's up? Welcome in. Hoge Jahns back with you as the Bears continue to fill out their coaching staff. Ben Johnson's first staff as a head coach. Names coming in, Johns, and, we're scrambling to dig.
You're still doing research on Declan Doyle.
Well,
this podcast should help you with your research today.
I think whatever is out there on Declan Doyle, I've read. It wasn't a whole lot. So got through that one pretty quick. But that's why we're gonna bring some guests on in the show to learn more about these guys. Nick Kosmider, who covers the Broncos, will join us, and Larry Holder, who covers the Saints. Both of these guys for the Athletic, of course. Both of them will be on this podcast today to help us learn more about these candidates. But there's some other news we got to get into as well, at least in terms of other coaches jumping on the staff. Make sure you're following us at Adam Hoge, at Adam Johns. You can read Johnsy in The Athletic. You can find me at allchgo.com. Last part of my coaching series went up comparing the Ben Johnson hire to all the other hires under George McCaskey's watch. Quite a stark contrast once you do all the research and the digging. So if you want to read that, you can find that at allchgo.com. The Bears hired Press Taylor, passing game coordinator.
Our last passing game coordinator was Thomas Brown, who went from passing game coordinator to offensive coordinator to interim head coach in a matter of 18 days. A lot of experience, more experience than Declan Doyle. And I think Declan Doyle is going to oversee Press Taylor. Press Taylor was most recently the offensive coordinator of the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Yeah. Press Taylor was once Declan Doyle.
You want to put it that way?
He was.
Sure.
He's because he's still only 37 years old. I feel like he's been in the league forever, and he basically kind of has. I mean, he entered the league in 2013 with the Eagles. So, you do the math on that, and he was Declan Doyle. He was actually even younger than Declan Doyle. Well, he's basically the same age Declan Doyle was when he started getting his chance with Shawn Payton.
You're talking about when he was the Eagles quarterbacks coach.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he started as an, QC. Same thing as Declan Doyle, works his way. Now, so he was not an offensive coordinator, though, until a couple years ago. But in his situation, I guess he was still there with Doug Peterson, though. So, yeah, he's been with Doug for a while. Won the Super Bowl with the Eagles. Works with quarterbacks. So it's another quarterback voice to get in the room to work with Caleb Williams. That's where I kind of want to ask this question, though. It feels like a little redundant, doesn't it? Like, did they need a passing game coordinator? This is the same conversation we were having last year with, when Matt Eberflus fired Luke Getsy and pivoted to Shane Waldron. All of a sudden, they brought in all these extra voices into the room. We learned later that Thomas Brown really wasn't doing a whole lot until he had to. So I just found it notable that Ben Johnson decided to make this hire.
I imagine that Ben Johnson has more of a vision for this role than Shane Waldron had for Thomas Brown's role as passing game coordinator. So passing game coordinator, to my understanding, it varies from team to team, just in terms of what these responsibilities are, but you're doing advanced work essentially on, what pass concepts of yours will work against the opposition and so forth, that type of work. I don't think Shane Waldron used much of Thomas Brown's work, if I'm being honest, to the point where Thomas Brown was your nickelback during some installs. I don't think Press Taylor is going to do that. And I think one difference to me is that with Ben Johnson, also your head coach / play caller, not so much the more voices, but the help is needed from Declan Doyle, from Press Taylor, from Antoine Randall L, from JT Barrett. He's going to need the help to help with the game planning. Obviously, he's going to have a major influence in how things work, especially later in the week, but he needs help early in the week. That's where Taylor and Doyle come in.
So when I saw David Blau's name come up for this gig. I'm like, that makes sense. David Blau played in Detroit under Ben Johnson, and then he got into coaching there. Like they've been around each other a lot. And then he ended up getting I forget what his exact job is with Washington right now, but he was with the Commanders. So I'm like, okay, that he's bringing in an extra guy he trusts, that he knows and knows what he likes to do, has literally played, on the team that Ben Johnson was coaching. I don't really see the connection with Press Taylor.
See, that's what I like about it, because that's like Ben Johnson's story, right? Like I wrote about this. This guy, he just draws from everywhere. Like that's who Ben Johnson is. He studies offenses like, well, it's his job. Obviously, that's a saying, but he loves to do it. He loves to draw influences, plays, concepts from all different places. So I think this is part of what Ben Johnson just loves to do. Oh, you have some different strategies? You have some different concepts we could talk about? Come on in.
I can buy into that. I'm just saying, I think there's more similarities to like Waldron adding Thomas Brown to the staff, where it's like,
yeah,
I don't know, maybe a couple months in, he's like, well, actually, I don't like what you run.
Yeah. So
when I was really going to use that.
When I was writing that story on Ben Johnson that ran, was it just last week? I think it was last week, about his influences. One of the former offensive coordinators that I talked to was speaking candidly with me. And he's like, what Ben is doing is so important because he's running something different. Everybody else is trying to run the same thing. They're all trying to pull from the same darn tree. Do you know how much easier that is for defensive coordinators to game plan against?
Yeah.
Ben Johnson is different because he's drawing from so many different influences. He's creating his own thing. It's not the McVay Shanahan tree that has spread across the league that helps defensive coordinators now catch up to it because everybody's running it. Everybody's running it. Now, I know some things will change from town to town, but some of the core concepts are the same. So to have Ben Johnson maybe sticking with what he knows works for himself, I kind of like it. I'm in a good mood today, Adam.
Okay. All right. I'm scarred by passing game coordinators of the past and having too many cooks in the kitchen.
There's been one.
There's been two. Matt Nagy did the same thing. He fired Mark Helfrich. He brought 800 offensive coaches into the room.
Who was his passing game coordinator? You got to remind me. I don't remember. Did he really have a title?
Well, because there was Bill Lazor was the OC, and then there was
Dave Ragone got the title.
Dave Ragone, and then John DeFilippo was the quarterback's coach. It was like, what does Ragone do? Like, there was all of a sudden there was all these voices, and it's the same thing they did last year. When they added all these guys and added all these titles. I don't know. I think I'm anti passing game coordinator. Just stop with these vague titles and no one knows what they mean and what they do.
Well, we have to ask Ben himself.
Okay. I'm sure we'll get a straight answer.
I think a lot of it is maybe we will, because I remember asking Shane Waldron that, like, directly, like, what does Thomas Brown do? And it was a vague answer about like the early work in the week. Well, I'm like, well, the week doesn't end on Wednesday. Like, what happens Wednesday to Sunday? Sunday being the most important of all days.
Right. It's like game prep work that you just hand it over, and then it's like, all right, now what do I do for the rest of the week?
Yeah. Yeah. I imagine, I hope, forget I imagine, I hope that Thomas Brown envisions something different for Press Taylor and even Declan Doyle, because that's not a traditional offensive coordinator role. I think we can all agree on that as well.
Well, right. So, I mean, I guess that's my point. Ben has a lot of explaining to do here. So you got Ben Johnson at the top, Antoine Randall, who's the assistant head coach and wide receivers coach, who we think outranks the OC, 28-year-old Declan Doyle, who outranks JT Barrett, quarterback's coach. And then somewhere in there is Press Taylor, who has worked with Carson Wentz and Trevor Lawrence with very mixed results. Am I missing anybody in there?
I imagine.
I'm talking about in terms of the quarterback trust.
Yeah.
Like,
I'm saying
the
I
guy's
imagine
working
as
with the
much.
quarterback.
I think that Ben Johnson is going to lean into Antoine Randall for more organizational things in terms of like messaging, running certain meetings, holding certain meetings when it comes to that assistant head coach role. Now, Antoine Randall, your receivers coach, I still think will probably have to answer to the organization of, well, Declan Doyle, and then all the way up to Ben Johnson.
Okay. Well, we'll see how it all works out. The thing I just keep stressing is, like, this is really important. I just want, like, let's remember, this is Caleb Williams. You got 3 years here.
I don't think if I'm going to be pessimistic about anything, like, where's the offensive line coach? Because that's a big one. That is
huge.
That is things by the end of Chris Morgan's tenure were not good. I'm wondering how much influence Ryan Poles is going to have on this decision as a former offensive lineman, position he's passionate about, but also what Ben Johnson wants. Like, who's the young up and coming coach to run the offensive line? I don't think you need a run game coordinator. I think you just need an offensive line coach, but that offensive line coach is instrumental in planning the run game. Who is it? It's the next most important hire.
Yep. Hi, Katie.
Hi, Katie. She gave the
Sorry.
No, it's all good. We got our guy Nick Kosmider joining us right now, so we at least know a little bit about Press Taylor. No one knows a lot about Declan Doyle, it seems. So we thought we'd bring in Nick, who covers the Broncos for The Athletic, and we bring him into the show right now. You can follow him on Twitter at Nick Kosmider. What's up, Nick? Thanks for jumping on with us.
Absolutely. How you guys doing?
We're trying to figure out who Declan Doyle is.
Well, it's funny because when that hiring went down, there were even, a fair amount of fans, both casual and otherwise, who said, wait, who is Declan Doyle? Because he's a guy, a pretty anonymous figure for what's been a relatively anonymous group for this Broncos team the last 2 years. They've been near the bottom in tight end production from a receiving standpoint. And that's just much more, the personnel. That's still a spot that they're very much searching for in terms of having a productive pass catcher at that position. But internally, Declan Doyle is a guy who, I've talked to a lot of guys in that room, particularly Adam Troutman, who was with Declan Doyle with the Saints as well, and says just the thing that stands out about him is just kind of the ultimate collaborator, right? Both from pulling from players, pulling from other coaches. He wants to see the game through the eyes of the guys in his own room, and certainly that's going to now extend to the offensive side of the football. He's one of 3 assistants hired, former Broncos assistants hired this cycle as coordinators. And so obviously you see that Shawn Payton tree, that's always been pretty significant, is branching out, in even a new way this offseason.
Yeah, that coaching staff right now is kind of getting rated right now, it seems like.
Yeah, you had John Morton, who was the pass game coordinator for the Broncos last year, getting hired to be Ben Johnson's replacement in Detroit as the offensive coordinator there. Doyle obviously going to be the OC for the Bears, and then Chris Banjo, who after the Broncos let go Ben Kotwika, the special teams coordinator, shortly after the season, there was some thought internally that he might be the guy that they promote into that role. He instead is going to be on Aaron Glenn's new staff with the New York Jets. The Broncos also moved on from their inside linebackers coach. So yeah, 4 vacancies at least right now on Denver's staff, and in a large part because other teams are looking around saying, hey, we want we want that kind of Shawn Payton connection.
How would you describe Shawn's influence on a young coach in Declan Doyle? Still like a sponge soaking things up, I imagine. So what type of role, what type of influence was Shawn on him?
Yeah, I think a big one. Again, when you're on his staff, it's just sort of this known thing that you're gonna grind in a pretty unique way. Shawn's kind of a late night guy. You're in that building, really long hours. But again, it's a pretty collaborative process in terms of trying to find the right matchups. They're very granular in terms of how they go about building game plans, trying to find every mismatch that they can. The game planning part of that is a really big deal, and so I'm sure that he has gotten the opportunity to mimic a little bit of how Shawn Payton does that, or will have the opportunity to mimic a little bit about how Shawn Payton does that. And obviously, there's the connection with Dan Campbell and Ben Johnson. Dan knowing Shawn Payton so well, having coached for him in New Orleans, and so I'm sure that connection came through within some of those discussions. But yeah, it's just one where he keeps his guys around, kind of as long as they can. He values the continuity of a staff, and Declan Doyle has been with Shawn Payton for 5 of his 6 NFL seasons as an assistant coach. So there will be, I think, a lot rubbing off in terms of how he probably goes about building game plans and operating an offense.
Yeah, I'm picturing Dan Campbell. Don't take my assistants. Go take Shawn's. Stay away from my staff.
You wonder how
Dan steal from Shawn.
Yeah, and then steals one from Shawn. Yeah, so you wonder, what's going on there? First in 2023, Dan beats down Shawn and the Broncos on national television to more or less squash their playoff hopes, and now he's raiding his staff both for himself and for his So no, they have a really strong connection, and so it wasn't. Once you kind of put those puzzle pieces together, it wasn't really a surprise that group is pulling from this Denver staff.
No, I gotta ask you because looking at the Broncos tight ends, not the most impressive unit in terms of production and all that. I mean, should that be viewed as a concern with Declan Doyle, or he's not coming to the Bears to be the tight ends coach, and maybe that doesn't matter as much? I'm just trying to figure out how that should be factored into this.
Yeah, I wouldn't put a lot of stock in that for a couple reasons. I think the one you just mentioned is that it's kind of like an overall offensive picture that he's going to be in charge of helping put together. But also the deal with Denver's tight ends is, like, they thought they had a guy in Greg Dulcich when Shawn Payton came here in 2023. Dulcich's first offseason program and training camp, they were looking around saying this could be kind of like our joker guy. We know that Shawn Payton had a lot of productive tight ends, whether it was Jimmy Graham, Jeremy Shockey, Benjamin Watson. Like, he's had really productive tight ends during the course of his career as an offensive coach. And they thought Dulcich might be that guy for them. Had a really strong training camp in 2023. And then right before the season started, he suffered a hamstring injury that was similar to the one he had as a rookie in 2022, and barely played in 2023. Appeared in 2 games, dealt with that injury all year. Right as he was getting over that, he had a foot injury. So he came back this year in 24, and he was recovered from the injuries, got through training camp, but just never kind of got back to himself. And so when you are missing that element of the offense, I think that speaks to their production from a pass catching perspective as much as anything else. They were still very involved in the game plan. Like, Troutman is a very solid, tight end in terms of both, being a run blocker, being involved in a lot of what they do offensively, and being still a target in moments where they really need him to be. So I wouldn't put a lot of stock into it. It's much more a personnel issue that Denver had versus anything schematically that wasn't happening.
Nick, can you take us through Bo Nix's rookie season? Like, what worked well, what didn't work well, high points, low points, and what do you think, if there's some factors or some elements, like, what do you think Declan Doyle will take from that experience to bring to Chicago?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think number one, you start by not dropping him back 40 times. That's initially what the Broncos were doing early in the season. And a lot of those were, short screen passes, extensions of the run game. But, I think as the season went on and Shawn Payton got a lot more familiar and comfortable with what Bo Nix did best and what he was most comfortable with, you start to really see it blossom. Bo Nix didn't throw his first touchdown pass until week 4. He ended up with 29, which is second most for a rookie in NFL history. And it was really just about like adding a little bit week by week. You saw the playbook for him expand. You saw them, doing things a little bit differently. But I think the one thing that Declan Doyle will really take from Shawn Payton is just how adamant he is about reducing sack numbers and the responsibility that a quarterback has for that. In Shawn Payton's view, he said it a number of times, like sacks are more a product of what the quarterback is doing oftentimes in the offensive line. Now, of course, that's not always the case. But I think he'll have that kind of in his ear in terms of, okay, how do we come in here and make sure we're both training our quarterback, but also building the ecosystem around him that really prioritizes not taking sacks or reducing the number of sacks that we do take. The Broncos cut theirs almost in half during Bo Nix's first year, and you saw what that did for their offense. They went from about 20th in offense to 10th this past year. And so I really think that, that there's so much to it, but I think that in particular is just one thing that sticks out of like, all right, how do we help bring this number down?
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense from especially when you consider the difference between what Bo Nix was doing in Denver this year and what Caleb Williams was doing. Obviously the sacks were a huge story. So if there's a way to cut that down, that would be great. What's the, how do you personally view Bo Nix's season? Because I mean, there's a lot of great things to take from it. Broncos made the playoffs. And it was quite frankly pretty surprising to see that not only Bo Nix get drafted where he got drafted, but then to have the success he did as a rookie.
Yeah, I think the reason that it was most encouraging is the way that he improved as the season went along. It was a very tangible elevation for him from, again, that first month of the season where you're just saying like, man, I don't even know if he's seeing it. Shawn Payton throughout that time was continuously, he'd kind of almost clap back when anybody mentioned the word confidence and whether Bo Nix was struggling with it. He said it's just a matter of he needs to see more things. We're not doing good enough on third down to get to a lot of the plays that allow him to see what defenses are doing. And really that he had this game against the Jets in which he threw for -7 yards in the first half in week 4, finished the game with 60 total yards, but they had a game-winning drive in the third quarter, the only touchdown of the game that he orchestrated in kind of a driving rain. And you said like, man, he just finds a way. Like, and that's what became kind of the story of his season was that, it didn't always look pretty, but he found a way to always have them in position. Until their playoff game, they didn't lose a single game by more than 7 points this year, and so they were in everything. And so I think that was the most productive thing. That's our most encouraging thing. That's what has, I think, fans really excited to see as he has another year under his belt. Can they get some more offensive weapons around him? Because that was a big issue. They didn't run the ball as well as they needed to this past season. Can they go out and get an explosive running back, be it in free agency or the draft? And then tight end is another huge position that they need to fill. If they can get some of those things around him, I won't say sky's the limit. He doesn't have necessarily the same natural elite talents that Caleb Williams has or Jaden Daniels has. But certainly he's going to get the most out of what he does have. And part of that is just going to be continuing to master Shawn Payton's offense and building upon it.
With Doyle, how would you describe, well, his energy, his charisma at practice? Is he one of the loud vocal coaches? Is he like, how do you think he would handle weekly media obligations? Like, how do you think he's going to handle maybe this new expansive role for himself?
Yeah, it's going to be new. That there's not a lot of media that you do as the tight ends coach, outside of a couple one-off interviews here and there. But I had a staffer tell me, the other day that Doyle was probably his favorite assistant coach on the staff to work with, just because of just how personable he is, how down to earth he is. You never felt like you're, talking to a coach. He's just kind of like just a guy. And so I don't want to give an answer that I'm not necessarily qualified to give, just because not knowing what he'll be in that scenario. But certainly he's a guy that a lot of people, they're just attracted to the, his personality and the way that he kind of conducts himself. And again, that was something that, Troutman's a good sort of vibe on Doyle because of the fact that he's been with him so long, and just says, again, this is a guy he's going to listen to you. He's going to kind of take your feedback. And that's obviously an important part of a guy that's helping to build an offensive game plan.
Well, it'll be interesting to see exactly what his role is, first of all, and he's actually meeting with the media today for the first time. So we'll get our first Declan Doyle experience. But Nick, appreciate you coming on. Appreciate the insights. Johns, you got anything else?
No. We'll see. He's young. He's 28 years old, 29 years old.
Yeah. No, it's been a quick rise for him. And again, it's just, I think coaches, they understand what coaches go through with Shawn Payton in order to be a guy that stays on his staff, that he wants to have around. And so if you kind of get through his grinder, coaches believe, okay, you can deal with whatever, whether it be the hours or the demands, you can get through that with Shawn Payton. You can definitely do it at a high level. So I think that's a big part of the reason you're seeing some of these young assistants. It was the one thing I'll say is, a lot of us thought the first young assistant that gets hired away from his staff was going to be Davis Webb, the quarterbacks coach, who, just recently finished his NFL career, just got done with his second season as Denver's quarterback coach. He's going to be a name to watch in terms of future offensive coordinator roles and perhaps even down the road head coaching roles. But for now, he's sticking around, and it's Doyle getting that chance.
Yeah, didn't his name come up for a head coaching gig at some point, or maybe just named in one of those stories of guys to watch or something? I remember
I think there was a report that he was going to be interviewing for the Saints head coaching job, but I don't think that was accurate as far as I understand it. And so I think he's just kind of, look, they had a great quarterback room that they probably won't be able to bring back Jarrett Stidham and Zach Wilson, who were really they and their significant others had weekly dinners. They became a great group, and Davis Webb was a big part of that. But I think he's really eager to kind of continue to work with Bo Nix and see what they can put together in year two.
Nick Kosmider, appreciate the information. Make sure you're following him at Nick Kosmider. Does a great job covering the Broncos for The Athletic. Thanks, man.
Thanks, fellas. Take care.
Thanks, Nick. So, Shawn Payton, that's a strong endorsement. You feel better?
I can see why, you're going to go, especially when you hear Nick talk about it's almost like a Shawn Payton boot camp that these guys go through, right? Plus you have the connection from Dan Campbell working with Shawn Payton. Obviously, even if Ben Johnson didn't work with Shawn Payton, we know how these connections with coaches all work. And so if you're going to be in a situation where you have to take a leap of faith and hire a coordinator that you've never worked before, which in this case, all three of them, Ben Johnson's never worked before. That's going to be interesting to see that play out. I could see why it's, put together this way. On the flip side, Dennis Allen is a very different coordinator hire because he is not 28 years old and he's been a head coach in the league twice. So a little bit more familiarity with Dennis Allen, obviously. However, to get the latest on Dennis, we're going to bring in our guy, Larry Holder, who covers the Saints for The Athletic, and he can help us fill in with, what happened with Dennis Allen down in New Orleans. Obviously, he's been there for a long time. A lot of great defenses, didn't work out as a head coach. Some similarities maybe to Matt Eberflus in terms of good defensive guys that haven't worked out as head coaches. Now he's the Bears defensive coordinator. Larry, thanks for jumping on with us.
Yeah, you got it. And I will just say, it's not like when Dennis Allen became a head coach that he all of a sudden stunk as a defensive coach. So that's there's definitely the narrative out here, and it's strong in New Orleans. Dennis Allen, never had coaching material, and some people aren't in circumstances. I don't think he totally had the fair circumstances this year, but I think people were just stale with him. But it's not and you could tell even by when Dennis was let go, even general manager Mickey Loomis basically said, I didn't want to fire him. He's a great coach. Now, is he maybe not a great head coach? Obviously the record says no, but Can he coach defenses? Yes. So when I saw this hire, I said I knew Dennis Allen was going to be hired as a defensive coordinator because he's still one of the better ones in the league, and it doesn't matter what his head coaching record is to me. And I go back with him. I started covering the Saints in 2006, and he was on the original staff. When he came with Payton. So I've seen his rise, and look, he 1,000% deserves this job, and I think that's a great hire for Ben. Like, I think that was super smart. Obviously, he has some intel. Like, maybe he talked to Dan Campbell about him. But, obviously they know each other well. But look, I think that's, to me, a no-brainer hire. I think the Bears are going to really like, and Bears fans are going to really like what they see with Dennis.
2006. I'm glad you brought that up because I feel like Dennis Allen's been in New Orleans for forever. It just feels like
Well, he did hop around. I mean, he was, because of course he was through the Super Bowl. Then he was defensive coordinator with Denver, and then he took the Raiders job. Obviously, that went in the tank. And then as soon as he was fired there, he basically was hired by Shawn Payton to come back to the Saints to babysit Rob Ryan, and basically said Rob Ryan's going to flame out, and so I've got my guy in waiting. Like Dennis was so thrilled when he came back to New Orleans, and then Rob was not happy whenever he talked about Dennis being around because he knew. And then less than a season in, like I think it was week 12, they fired Rob, and then Dennis became the guy, and then all of a sudden, what do you know? Saints defense goes up and up and up and up and up. And the offense wasn't as big of the story as the defense was. So, yeah, look, he knows what he's doing. I mean, there's no question about it.
What are some of the staples of a Dennis Allen defense? Like, if you had to, like, boil this down, like, how would you describe what it always does well, where it always stands out, like the stats that kind of define it? Like, how would you describe the core tenets of what Dennis Allen wants to do?
Well, what he really liked doing, and it's kind of gone down just as the pieces have kind of drifted away. But I mean, there was obviously a premium on edge rushers, and when the Saints were really good, I mean, Cam Jordan was one of the best. Trey Hendrickson was a budding player, and then the Saints foolishly let him walk in favor of keeping around Marcus Davenport. That is like one of the most ultimate blunders right now that's happened. And they like to play a lot of aggressive man coverage in terms of, and that goes hand in hand when, say, they got Marshawn Lattimore and they were able to be able to do that. And that was when in his prime. Same thing with they were able to do that pressure and lean on. And look, they certainly implemented too. Demario Davis was one of the best blitzers as a traditional linebacker. So when you have a smart middle linebacker who can do a whole lot of things, they used him a lot there too. So it's not like we're recreating the wheel, but they had the good pieces and they knew how to use them. So it's, like I said, and it seems like, especially like secondary wise, I would think the Bears are in really good shape. So, Dennis will probably say, all right, I can do some exotic things if I want, but, ultimately he probably doesn't want to have to do that. So that it seems like they have a good base for that for him to be more creative, but if he wants to be, but like I said, and you guys know more than me, like the Bears secondary is one of the stronger units in all football.
I don't know if this is necessarily Dennis Allen's fault, but I do think there's a connection here. At least we need to ask and get an answer to. But how does Zach Bond go from a special teams guy
to a reaction?
Yeah, just like how does that happen? And is there any blame to go around for Dennis Allen? Because now we're talking about an All-Pro who is a candidate for Defensive Player of the Year.
It's amazing because even when they drafted him, and they said, "Oh, we're going to use him as a traditional linebacker." I said, "I don't get it. He was a pass rusher at Wisconsin, and he fits more of a 3-4 defense, and the Saints never ran that. It was a 4-3. So, he was miscast there. And then, look, you had Demario Davis. He was your primary linebacker, and you had other linebackers they had, and it just didn't seem to fit. And like, that's a blunder that obviously I just mentioned Trey Hendrickson, now Zach Bond. It's like laughable. How could they do that how could he become that there? And it kind of goes back to an Eagles stigma with the Saints. It's like, well, Malcolm Jenkins left and he won a Super Bowl. Darren Sproles left and went to the Eagles. It's like the Eagles fleece the Saints all the time now, even with C.J. Gardner-Johnson. But yeah, so it's that is, I don't know. But part of it is basically like, look, you have DeMario Davis. There's not many better than him. Even at his age, he's still one of the better linebackers in the NFL. So I think they didn't want to put Zach Bond as a weak side linebacker, and they typically, you only play 2 linebackers these days. So, and it just never worked. And you could see it like on the field, it just never worked. And all of a sudden, you get the right pieces, and look where he is. So, I mean, kudos to him because he could have just said, "Man, I'm not cut out for this," and all of a sudden now he's a finalist for the Defensive Player of the Year. If you would have said, would Zach Bond ever even start, much less be a finalist for Defensive Player of the Year? I'd be like, never in my entire lifetime. No.
Larry, in Chicago, the defensive coordinator could be as much of a storyline as the head coach. You mentioned Rob Ryan, Buddy Ryan, of course. Everybody knows his
We had
story.
Greg Williams and a bounty scandal. Trust me, defensive coordinators can be a huge story. Yes.
What, like, in terms of personality, like media settings, like all the above that comes with like the responsibilities of running a defense, like the passion, the charisma, the fire, the energy, like beyond the X's and O's. What's Chicago getting in Dennis Allen?
He's more of an even keel guy. He's not a boisterous guy. That's why, like, when I mentioned when Dennis came back and he's like teamed up with Rob Ryan, it's like oil and water. Like what kind of, like, Dennis was deemed like the boring guy. And of course, Rob with his hair and, obviously big belly and all this, bluster. But yeah, he's definitely more of an even keel guy. And to his credit, I think he's honest when speaking publicly. I've never had any real issues. Like, you might say, "Oh, well, I disagree with what he's saying," but he's not BSing you. So I think that's a good thing. But there's no doubt the defensive players that have played for him, for the Saints for a long time, look, they trust what he's doing. Like, he knows what he's doing. There's no doubt about that in my mind. It's not like he got, like I said, it's not like he got dumb. He knows what he's doing. And it's just like in New Orleans, the pieces were getting older and diminishing, and you did not have any offensive help to kind of overcome that. So both sides of the football kind of fell, and it is what it is. There's a reason why the Saints, in my opinion, still have a job opening, because it's one of the least attractive jobs in terms of cap room, players. Like, it's a rough job. So if Kellen Moore takes it, which seems like that might be the case, I mean, that's, I'm not going, "Oh, wow, great, Kellen Moore's gonna be the coach. Like, he's going to be the savior." No, but I don't know who can. So that's the thing. It's like with Dennis, I mean, he knows what he's doing. I think part of it, he got dealt a bad hand and they underachieved, and it goes hand in hand with his previous head coaching record. So now he's kind of stained there. But look, when it comes to defenses, there's not too many people in the league I would trust more than him, really.
So, beyond just the defensive stuff, he's been a head coach twice. I think he's got 14 years on Ben Johnson. What did he do well as a head coach that you think can help, a younger guy who's getting his first crack at it?
I think he tried to work with the pieces that he had, like personnel, and so obviously he's focusing on a defense, Ben's on offense, and but so I think that even defensively, like the defense was good enough for them to be at least in games and in a mediocre division. So I think at least, he was able to do that well. The offensive pieces, like going from Drew Brees to any of the quarterbacks that they've had to use in the last few years, I mean, it was a bad proposition. But I do think maybe, like I said, and I got to reiterate it because I'm sure Chicago is like, Dennis Allen is a terrible head coach, but he knows defense. I mean, that's plain and simple. He does. Look at the results when the Saints had their pieces were a little younger. I mean, it was look, it was one of the top units in football. And in Drew Brees' heyday, like when his heyday, he didn't have defenses, but back end of his career for that, the defense was really helping him. Like that, and he as his arm was kind of fading, and they had to kind of cover that up, and they went a different philosophy. But look, I just think that Dennis, he has a know-all. He's he's pretty strong in his convictions, even though publicly you might say, oh, he's not this most exciting guy. But look, he knows what he's doing. I'm just going to keep reiterating that because a lot of people don't think that. Like, and it's a bad narrative.
And he comes with that Shawn Payton endorsement, and we were just talking about that with Nick. I guess as an extension of that, I don't know what you know about Declan Doyle. I think there's some overlap for you there a little bit. Obviously young coordinator, 28, 29 years old, working with Ben Johnson now. But like that Shawn Payton influence for someone who's like covered like his entire career in New Orleans, like how would you encapsulate that? Like the positives, the negatives, and what those coaches from the Shawn Payton way of doing things, that way of life, like what do they take from that?
Well, don't sell that to people down here because they wanted their head coach with no ties to Shawn Payton. Aaron Glenn, no, he's a bum. They can't have him because he has ties to Payton. I'm like, what kind of stupid talk is that? But you go back to like Declan Doyle. I don't really know him that well at all, but I will say when he was maybe 23, I would hear from people, look out for Declan Doyle. He's going to be somebody. And now 5 years later, he's in a position to where, and it's a good spot for him because he doesn't have to be the offensive coordinator. We know Ben Johnson's going to be doing that. Same thing as like what Shawn Payton did when Pete Carmichael was here forever. Shawn made the calls. I think Shawn has a good sense of kind of adaptability. Like, he does, if he sees something's not working, and I think he's brought that influence to the people who have gotten jobs after that. You adapt to the pieces that you have and don't be so stubborn. And so I think that's something where you look at, Dan Campbell, you look at now Aaron Glenn's a head coach. We see Dennis has had he was the no-brainer hire here in New Orleans. But like you see some of these guys, and Shawn is an alpha guy. I don't know how much, like, say as a head coach, Dennis is an alpha guy. But like Dan Campbell is an alpha guy. Aaron Glenn is an alpha guy. Like these are people that you will follow. And I think part of that is doing that. And like I said, it's also relating to players like Shawn. Maybe, look, obviously we're all getting older, but he still relates to players. Like I think that's part of it too. And I think that's something that you see the coaches that he do like that have come under that tree. They've learned that. And so, yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like you could see just even like assistant coaches who've gotten bigger jobs elsewhere. I mean, there's a reason why he's starting to have a tree, like because of this. And of course he's part of the Parcells tree. So he's got part of that with him, but he's certainly done it long enough to have his own spin. And I think that, and I think part of what Dennis didn't do well here in New Orleans is like he's not Shawn Payton. Like, and I think you had so much carryover in the locker room that maybe some people felt like they could, as the head guy, maybe kind of walk on him, walk all over and not take him as serious. And that wasn't the case for the defensive players. He has those credentials for that, but the head job, not as alpha, not as like in your face screaming, not as all that. So it's but yeah, I think you see some of the traits that, like I said, Dan Campbell, Aaron Glenn, those guys, they're alpha guys in what they have to do.
Yeah. Larry, appreciate all the insight. It's great stuff. And everybody should, senior writer for The Athletic, following you on Twitter at
He's
Larry
got a new
Holder.
gig, collectibles.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely a weird change up in let's see, been doing this for 20 years, covered either the Saints or the NFL for 19 years. And now I'm covering Larry Holder, baseball card beat writer. Nice to meet you. It's a weird thing, but the collectibles and memorabilia world, it's wild. I've been on a job for 2.5 weeks full time, and it is wild. The Paul Skeens card, I mean, that's the $1 million card.
Story.
Yeah, where an 11-year-old hit that card in Los Angeles, and it's a wild story. Just in and of
I don't,
itself.
Larry, I don't know a whole lot about that stuff, but I was kind of vaguely following that story, and I was like, who wants season tickets to the Pirates? Like that was a no-brainer. You turn that down immediately and you keep the card. I
don't even think if you live in Pittsburgh and you pull that card, you can keep the seats. I'll sell the card because that card's going to be $1 million card. Like it's going to auction. It will be $1 million card, and it's fun. And look, I'm an LSU alum, so hey, Paul Skeens, good stuff, good times.
What could this sports writer get for 27 Michael Jordan cards that are fully encased, still in great condition, some of them tip-top condition? How much do you think I could get for Jordan cards going back to the 90s?
Well, Adam, we have this thing called Slack. You better send me the cards. I recommend getting them graded because then you know the real condition. Michael Jordan is still the biggest name in all of collectibles. Still bigger than anybody. You name it, sport. Nope. Still the biggest. Still number one. His cards are monsters. So come on, you could send them over to me. I'll tell them what's good. We'll get a little commission.
Little story,
when you sell them.
yeah. Put my kids through college. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah. No, even the later cards, like even so it's
got a lot. I got like 4 or 5 Shaquille O'Neal rookie cards.
He still sells.
Wow.
Not no one's Jordan, but Shaq is still a name. But yes, I would recommend you bringing them to see someone to get them graded. They send them off to get them graded, and then you never know. You might just quit the podcast. You might be a billionaire. I don't know. I don't know what cards you have.
Yeah. When I collected cards, and I have this book, just like this book, there are all these little binders that you put the cards in, and it's like 100 Ryan Sandberg cards. And when we redid our house, I cannot find it for the life of me now. And now it's in my mind, like he was my favorite player growing up. Now I'm going to look for it for like an hour. And if I can't find it, I'm going to be like frustrated for weeks.
Mine too. And I'm a native New Orleanian, but thank you, WGN, and it's 1983 and 84. And I come to my great grandparents' house after preschool. Guess what he's watching at 1:20, watching the Cubs game. So guess what? If I'm a fan of anything, like, which sports writers, you really can't be, but Cubs. I mean, so I'm a Cubs guy. So I get it. I have a 83 Sandberg rookie that I'm like, it might only be
Great
worth
card.
like $12 now, but I'm never getting rid of it. Like
Yes.
that's my, and I'm not a big collector either. Actually, it's crazy. My kids got back into it a year ago, and they were into it for like 2 weeks, and then I stayed into it, and then all of a sudden we had this job, and I was like, let me just see what this is. So I'm certainly like I know some cards, but I'm not. I can't rattle off all this stuff. I'm basically taking I cover the NFL or the Saints approach to covering this, and so far it's working.
It's working.
Yeah,
that's awesome. Well, and you passed the biggest test of coming on a Chicago podcast by saying no one is Jordan. That's all you need to say, and it passes.
No
every
one
time.
is Jordan, not LeBron, not Victor Wembanyama, even though he's a monster in the industry right now. But no one is Jordan.
Larry, thanks so much, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you got it. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Larry.
All right. Yeah. that reminds me of I was thinking about this last week when Ben Johnson was talking about why he's a Cubs fan. It's stunning to me how the Cubs went from having this national appeal because of WGN and the fact you can watch the games everywhere to now nobody gets marquee.
Now you can't find them.
And I get that times change, technology changes, regional sports networks have come, and now they're going, and now they're trying to come back, or whatever the hell's going on with CHSN. But it's just like, it blows my mind that you could go from this thing that you literally have fans all over the country because of it to like, why is Ben Johnson a Cubs fan? Just because he grew up in North Carolina. But he is, and there's so many stories like that. It's just like crazy.
I gotta find that Ryan Sandberg binder, man. Now it's on my.
You
mind.
definitely do, and unfortunately, that made me realize I have no idea where all my baseball cards are that I saved.
Now we'll just
I
send
don't
him over to Larry. Like, how much do you think this is worth?
It's a bad job. That's an interesting field. I don't know really anything about it, but WGN used to have a guest that would come on the radio, and they would just have callers call in. They'd be like, "I have this. What is it worth?" And like kind of like what you just did with Larry. And sometimes some of the answers would just like blow you away.
Yeah.
Crazy.
You ever see that like Antiques Roadshow?
Yeah.
And every now and then someone would bring something in that was like a true antique from like the Victorian era or from like, I don't know, like something the Royals had in England or whatever.
Yeah.
Just like, no, that's actually worth $500,000.
I mean, that kind of makes sense. It's just, I get it. It's just never made sense to me how like a baseball card could be worth so much money. Like, I get like cars. Okay, yeah. Like they go away and there's only a few left from like the 60s or Mustang, whatever. But I guess it's the same thing with cards. It just doesn't seem like it would matter as much, but it does. As I always say on this show, the market's the market, Johns.
I have a story idea for Larry. He should come to Hallis Hall because there are hallways at Hallis Hall that are like a museum, just in terms of, call them artifacts, from old Bears memorabilia to old Bears advertisements. It's cool. Old newspaper clippings. Yeah. Some of that stuff has to be of immense value. Now it's never going to go anywhere, but the older teams, Packers, the Cubs, they should all have like their own museums of stuff like this, because I think fans would just find it so cool, so fascinating.
Interesting you say that, because the Packers do have a museum.
I know they do.
And the Bears should have a museum. And maybe they would have a museum if they build in Arlington Heights.
You got the space for it.
Yeah.
That would be my idea for Kevin Warren and George McCaskey when you listen to this podcast later today, like I know you will.
Well, there's that idea, and then there's the one I'm going to keep banging, and I know you support this too, is that if they're going to have that huge campus, they need to have a high school football field out there too.
Host games.
Put some stands out there. Doesn't have to be a ton. The footprint of the bigger stadium, and have like a game of the week there every single Friday night. It would be awesome.
Bigger. Host like the 5A to 8A state championship games, man.
Well, yeah, I'm just trying to start small, but yeah, if you want to make the stands big enough and you have all that space, you could have the state championships there.
Absolutely.
Now that would cause a lot of grumbling downstate, but
that's why I said 5A to 8A.
Oh, so gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah, Champaign can host the rest. Illinois State can host the rest.
Yeah, and East St. Louis can travel like they always do anyway.
Yeah, they're traveling anyway.
I think I saw yesterday they're going to play a school in Florida.
Well, they almost beat IMG this year.
That's right.
Or last year. Last football season.
Yeah. All right. Good stuff. Good insight. I want to end with this because we got a little sidetracked there with the collectible stuff, but just listening. First of all, and end on positivity. Okay. We've had guests, good, objective sports writers that work for The Athletic come on here, for example, the day after the Chase Claypool trade and say, that's a terrible trade. So the fact that we have, a couple good writers and even that little nugget from Larry on Declan Doyle when he was 23 years 23. Old, already hearing that, hey, this guy's going to be something. Okay. Because we're not hearing any negativity. That's a good thing, because we have heard that before when there's moves the Bears have made, and we've had writers. The Athletic is full of great writers that come on here and are like, I don't know about that one. We have not heard that, so that's good. And when it comes to Dennis Allen, this isn't really a controversial take, but one of the things I love about this hire, Johns, Vic Fangio had not been a head coach when he was the DC, but he, with his experience, he basically was the head coach of the defense. And I think that helped Matt Nagy a lot that first year when he was on the job for the first time, where it's just like, all right, this is Vic Fangio's defense. I can coach the offense. Yes, I have oversight because I'm the head coach, but for the most part, I'm going to let him do what he needs to do with his staff and his scheme and get it the hell out of the way. And I think that this is setting up for a similar situation with Ben Johnson, with the big difference that I don't think anybody's going to come poach Dennis Allen. He's had his 2 cracks at being a head coach. I would be shocked if that happens again. And if it does, I don't think it's going to happen next year. So whereas Matt Nagy lost Vic Fangio pretty quickly, I don't think that's going to be the case. And it really, I think, helps Ben Johnson. Yes, head coaching duties are going to be more on his plate, but it also takes a lot off his plate because I imagine he's going to let Dennis Allen do his thing and basically be the head coach of the defense.
Best case scenario, this is Sean McVay, Wade Phillips repeating itself.
Yeah.
Let's remember those stories back when Sean McVay got his start in LA. Wade Phillips was in full control of the defense while Sean McVay built what he's built the Rams into on offense. Obviously, they started with Jared Goff. There's a connection to the Lions, but Wade Phillips was fully in charge of that defense and that allowed Sean McVay to invest more of his time on that offense. And obviously, he built a juggernaut for himself. So to me, that's the best case scenario here. Ben Johnson, more time committed to the offense, while Dennis Allen does his thing on defense.
Absolutely. All right. Well, good show. A couple of great guests to give us a lot of insight, and I hope everybody enjoyed it. Again, please follow us at Adam Hoge, at Adam Johns. You can read John Z, Larry, and Nick, and everybody in The Athletic, theathletic.com/Hoge Jahns. If for some reason you are not subscribed already, you can catch me at allchgo.com and on the CHGO Bears podcast 5 days a week as well. Super Bowl coming up next week. I will be down in New Orleans with the always huge All City Extravaganza. We're taking over Media Row once again. Tons of guests already booked, including a couple Bears players. So look out for all of that. I think Kevin's going to fill in for me here on Hoge Jahns.
Yeah, we'll keep plugging away.
Because it's just kind of what it's become down there is just a little too much nonstop action for the whole week. So Kevin, I think as he did last year, will jump on and fill in here. I got a vacation after that too. So might be a little bit before you hear from me on this show, but I'll be back eventually.
Maybe get you on for a 10-minute hit next week.
I'll jump on next week for a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah. You let me know when that's happening, and we'll make it work out. It is always fun being at the Super Bowl, and it's in New Orleans. We were just talking to Larry. Maybe I'll stop by. Maybe I'll bring some of my memorabilia down there and have him grade it or whatever he was talking about.
Look at it. He's got some fun stories coming up. I'm excited for him. He's got we'll stay tuned. If you're into that stuff, that piqued your interest when you're listening to Larry, he's got some cool stories coming up for The Athletic.
Yeah. All right, we're out of here. John Z and Kevin and maybe me. We'll talk to you next week.
See ya.